I'm excited to be here in London at the World Championship of Shoemaking. I've got with me Gary Tok, author of Master Shoemaker. Gary, thank you so much for spending a little bit of time with us.
Thank you, Kirby.
You did an absolutely fantastic job with this book. You know, I was totally blown away. You know, truly a library piece, a coffee table book, incredible photography. And I know you and I, you know, we share our love for shoes. It's something we have in common. So tell me, you know, what was the inspiration for this book? Because it was a pretty broad survey of some of the best shoemakers in the world.
Well, it really started when I decided to explore the world of bespoke shoemaking for myself. And I was going to go to Europe and research about 12 shoemakers to find the right one for myself. And I thought I was going to take photos anyway, and I was going to write about it. So I thought, why not put that all into a collection? Because it's very rare to find an entire collection of bespoke shoemakers in one spot.
Absolutely.
And while we could have done something online or do it on the web, I thought being artisanal, producing a book, would actually be very nice, and it's something that you can keepsake for.
No, absolutely. And I mean, in your writing, I mean, the approach that you took was, you know, less about, you know, like an exhaustive history of all these different firms. You know, that's not what this book is about. So kind of describe to us, you know, what your approach was and really what you tried to capture.
In the last, say, 5 to 6 years, there's been a real explosion on interest in bespoke, all things bespoke, whether it's suiting, shoes, etc. And one of the things is that there's a lot of social media and also online content about these shoemakers. So if you wanted to read about the history and the background of a lot of these shoemakers, there's a lot of content on the internet. So I wanted to then focus on the personal stories and the craftsmanship and the artisanal nature of what it means to be a bespoke maker. So of all the shoemakers in there, we followed their personal story, their journeys into how they became a shoemaker to start with, and also how they saw the future of shoemaking. One of the consistent themes we found about in speaking to all these shoemakers is that it's very difficult to find young, new people who want to take up the craft. So apprenticeship and preparing themselves for the future is a common theme that comes out from the narrative we found. So that was a very interesting piece. So you never get those insights just from a historical background of a particular shoemaker. So that's what we focused on.
I mean, one of the things that I particularly enjoyed is, you know, you really, you know, I felt like captured and wrote about, you know, just your personal story of what it was like to have a relationship with these shoemakers. I mean, that's so much a part of the bespoke process. You know, it's not just the product that someone's able to make for you, you know, but it's the relationship you have with the maker, the chemistry, you know, their kind of personality, their quirks, their eccentricities. And I mean, was that something you found hard to capture? I mean, how did you approach, you know, being able to write that?
Well, part of it was spending time with them. So at a minimum with each of these shoemakers, I spent about 3 days with them, sitting down with them at their workshop, watching them work, taking photos as we go along, and having conversations. And I think that was part of the process for me to find out whether I could work with that shoemaker. Because ultimately with Bespoke, you're really buying into the relationship.
Absolutely.
Otherwise, there's no real reason to go to the extent of doing a bespoke, because you could easily buy a shoe off a well-known, reputable, ready-to-wear brand, and that's it. So ultimately, it's working with the artisan, with the shoemaker, getting a sense of how they see things, also getting a sense of how they might challenge you and perhaps push back on certain ideas that might not work. And that to me was a very interesting, fruitful process. Of all the shoemakers I met, there are certain ones that I eventually didn't make from, and that was not because I didn't think their work was any lesser than anyone else. It's just simply, you know, I realized that their style didn't really adhere to what I wanted out of a shoe. Interestingly enough, one of the funny stories we had out of that process was that it's very easy to get attracted to a chiseled toe shoe because it's not something you see readily available in ready-to-wear. So as a novice, and I was certainly a novice at that time, I got really attracted to
kind of the exaggerated aesthetic.
Exactly. But as I became more experienced, many of my shoes now are round-toed and very classic. So that's a thing that I personally experienced.
So I mean, one of the things that I've always kind of really enjoyed about you, Gary, is that you kind of have a very kind of methodical, deliberate approach towards Bespoke. I mean, it's really kind of what made this book possible. Is you said, look, I want Bespoke shoes. I'm going to go do a broad survey. You know, I'm going to meet these guys, interview them, look at their work, and kind of narrow it down. You then had what you said, 5 shoes made. And then you kind of experienced that, and then you whittled it down even more, and you know, now you're kind of left to the people you're making from. I mean, from that journey, like, what advice would you give to someone that's looking to begin in Bespoke? I mean, there's so many options out there, especially now. You know, they're all doing something different. They all have different personalities. I mean, how does one, you know, really go about finding a Bespoke maker that's right for them?
Well, one of the things is, I really think, is understanding what is the shoemaker capable of doing. And that primarily means the shape of their lasts and how they design that last. And part of that was captured in the book because I compiled all the various lasts that these shoemakers made and put them all into one section where you could easily compare whether a particular proportion is right for you or not. So the first thing I would advocate is that firstly understanding how your fit is, you know, how your feet are. So not all lasts and toe shapes are appropriate for every feet. Then having that innate understanding is important. Having an understanding of how your feet would fit into some of those shapes would be important. And then after that is having building the right relationship and actually having some investment in time. I think one of the important things to understand is that there's an investment in time when we're working with Bespoke shoes.
Absolutely.
Or Bespoke anything for that matter. So investing in time to understanding, you know, what they can do, what aesthetics they bring to your ideas, and also giving them the right to make the first shoe the way they want to make it for you. Yeah. So one of the things I do with Bespoke is, and whether it's tailoring or shoes, is that the first garment or shoe is the shoemakers or Bespoke tailor's garment.
Yeah. The house style.
The house style, exactly. They're going to make that how they think best fits me. And once we have that, we then have a basis of comparison to what I like and what I didn't like, and then we start making the tweaks from there.
So it's about you know, establishing the baseline of the house style and then evolving from that. Correct. You know, through the process, the Bespoke process and the relationship. You know, not trying to force something onto the tailor or onto a Bespoke shoemaker. Correct. That inherently is incompatible with their tastes.
Exactly, and I think a lot of the more professional and well-known shoemakers will subtly push back on anything that is outside of what they feel is doesn't represent their aesthetic or their view or their philosophy of the craft. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you're also buying into. Yeah. I think that's a very important element that often for a more sophisticated Bespoke buyer can appreciate.
So where do you see kind of, you know, your work going? I mean, you've got this book. Are you working on any other projects you can share with us, or?
We're working on a book called Master Tailors.
Okay.
And there we're going out and commissioning bespoke suits from potentially 9 of the most renowned tailors in the world, and effectively going through that same meticulous process of comparing.
Yeah, wow. And so allowing them to do their house styles.
Correct. So they would do their house styles, they would work on, and they would, you know, demonstrate their craft in how they see fit and what their interpretation of the aesthetic is.
Yeah. Great. So anyone that's interested in purchasing a copy of Master Shoemakers, where can they find it?
So for Master Shoemaker is at master_shoemaker on Instagram. And you can follow me personally on at Gazman70K.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Hey, Gary, thank you so much.
Thank you so
much. Really
much.
enjoyed this. Yeah,
Thanks
great
a lot.
seeing you.
Appreciate it.